Hey, what's going on everybody? Zach here with Brandon Wound Pickups, and today we have a video for the fellow guitar nerds among us. We're going to be taking a look at a bunch of vintage Fender pickups, and I'm going to show you guys kind of how to authenticate them and tell whether it's a new pickup or an old pickup, so on and so forth. It's going to be a pretty long video. I'm just going to do it as one take. So if I fumble over my words or I say something incorrectly, I'll fix it in the post-edit, but I'm just going to roll and we'll see what happens. First thing we're going to talk about is generalities, like just things you see across the board on vintage Fender pickups. And when I say vintage, we're talking kind of 50s on up through maybe the early 80s or something like that. So what's the first thing that you should do when you're authenticating a vintage pickup? And we've also done a video on Gibson before, so if you're looking for like a vintage Gibson PAF authentication video, look back on the channel. That's a couple of years ago, I think. But the first thing you're going to want to do, contact a professional. Just, that's the easiest way. You know, these pickups are worth a lot of money, guys, and there's a lot of fakes and replicas out there. If you want to be sure, just send the pickup to somebody that knows what they're looking at. Send me an email, zach@brandwoundpickups.com. I'll have my information down below also. James at Rewind Electronics, John at Throwback, Alex at Wiz, Klopman Electron. Just contact somebody that has seen a bunch of these. And that's kind of how I've learned a lot of the stuff I'm going to teach you guys, is just from experience repairing and rewinding these over the years. We get so many of them in for some reasons we'll talk about. And of course I learned a lot from Jared Brandon too, who started Brandon Wound. And of course he works for Gibson now. But anyways, yeah, contact a professional. But the first thing we're going to talk about is some Fender pickup generalities, like stuff that is pretty consistent across the board on the vintage Fender stuff. And then we'll get into more model specific stuff here a little bit later. All right, this is going to be a lot to get through. I'm going to try to remember everything, but we'll see. So let's start out by saying, if you're looking at, let's say, a Strat pickup or a Tele pickup or something like that, you don't want it to look perfect. These pickups were, gotta be honest, kind of slapped together. I mean, I know they're worth so much money now, but there was some sloppy work a lot of the time. So the perfect example of that would be on like a Blackguard Telecaster pickup. If we look, this is not a vintage one. I wish I had one here, but I don't. This is my new Ultimate Series Blackguard. Look at the magnets. You see that little flack around them? That's the flat work here. You're gonna see that a lot of the time on, especially flat poles, anything that's flush magnet-wise. And even on the Strats sometimes you can kind of see a little bit. It's not totally perfect, right? And on the bottom, again, see a little bit of that. And some of these magnets have actually moved around. It's hard to say if that's how they were done at the factory or, you know, they got knocked around later on. This has actually been rewound before. We're gonna talk about that too. We'll talk about how to spot some rewinds. But yeah, you're just looking for kind of general sloppy work. Lacquer everywhere. Let's see what we got here. These are a set of vintage bass pickups here, P-bass. You can see there's a big edge of lacquer there, kind of a run. Magnets are a perfect example of that. These magnets were ground by hand, and a lot of the times, I know you guys are not going to be able to see this, the bevels are inconsistent. Like, this magnet is hardly beveled at all. This one looks like it's been on a belt sander for 10 minutes. Inconsistencies, that's a big thing. Like on a Fender Custom Shop reissue pickup, these magnets are like beveled by CNC, so each bevel is perfect. Maybe I'll see if I can find a picture of that. That's one thing to look for. And I do want to preface all of this by saying, don't rely on anything that I'm going to say like as a 100%, you know, accurate thing, because there's always a little bit of exceptions here and there, and some of this stuff can be recreated also. Okay, so sloppy work, that's one thing. The next thing that's pretty consistent, well, is consistent across the board with vintage Fender pickups. The flat work, which is the black parts here, were pressed, right? They were stamped out. Today, they're usually, not always, I don't know what Fender does now, they probably still press them, but a lot of the like boutique manufacturers and stuff are laser cutting their flat work. including me. I do that also. But if you look at the edge of the flatwork here, it's there's some holes in it. It's not perfect. You can just kind of tell, whereas a modern, like laser cut flatwork, it's perfectly smooth. You can actually see some marks from the laser also. That's pretty consistent across the board. The vintage Fender pickups are lacquered. They dipped them in lacquer prior to winding and sometimes after winding to pot them. But they dipped it in lacquer to prevent corrosion from eating the coil wire. Spoiler alert, that doesn't work. That's why so many of these fail over time and you have to rewind them. Like these P-bass over here. Look at how rusty that is. That rust eats straight through the lacquer and into the coil wire. It's a very flawed design. I think they even still do it to this day, which I don't really understand. But yeah, so they're all lacquered. Now, while we're talking about lacquer, yeah, I mean, a reproduction can be lacquered also, right? It can. But there is one little thing that we can kind of talk about to help tell new lacquer from old lacquer. And that's with one of these guys. This is a UV light. Now, is this 100% guaranteed going to tell you if it's old lacquer or not? No, but it's a tool you can use to help, because a lot of the modern lacquers do not glow under black light. And the vintage lacquers do. So, if we take this, you run it over here. I know it's bright in here. You guys are not going to be... Oh, yeah. I really need to turn the lights off. Let me find one with a bunch on it. Yeah, bass pickup. There we go. See that? See how that's glowing green like that? Now, it's glowing like a bright green. It's just very bright in here, so you can't really see it that well. If we take one of my modern reproductions, which is lacquered, and you can see the lacquer with your eyes, but if you look, it doesn't glow green. But some lacquers do glow green. That's something that you can fake. I've seen people do it before. So again, don't rely on that. You're just kind of relying on everything, like a whole combination of things. On gray bottom pickups, you can see the lacquer because of the lacquer line there. They taped over the eyelets before they dipped it in. What else? Tele pickups. Tele pickups are always lacquered. The early ones are lacquer potted, so they would actually have lacquer on the windings as well. But generally, you're going to see more lacquer on like a Tele neck pickup than you are, say, a Strat that was wax potted. You can still see it, and it still has that same lacquer line also. Okay, so they're all going to be lacquered. I have an example for this. A guy sent in, actually I think just last week, a bass pickup. It was a J bass, and the customer said it was a 64. And here it is. And I'm looking at it. It is not. And that's always tough news to break, especially like in the PAF world. You just spent $6,000 on a pickup and it's fake. That's brutal. You don't want that to happen. That's why I'm kind of making a video like this. Yeah, so this bass pickup is a modern reproduction. How old is it? I don't know. It's pretty rusty, but that could have just been gigged a lot. But look, I know it's hard to tell on camera. We used black light here. There's no lacquer of any kind, like none. And that's red flag number one. I mean, you'd have to take the thing apart and strip all the lacquer off. You're not going to do that if you're rewinding a vintage pickup. Thing number two about this, we talked about magnet beveling. These are not beveled at all. Like, not even a little bit. The edges are sharp. And they are perfect. See how perfect that looks? Talked about that too, right? Yeah, not an original pickup. And of course you can look at the plain enamel too. This is pretty modern looking plain enamel, but the color can vary. We'll talk a little bit more about wire later. The cloth leads even, you know, it's not right. And unfortunately I had to break that news to the customer. But yeah. So lacquer, what's next here? Man, this is so tough to remember all this. And I'll probably repeat myself, I would imagine also. Let's see here. Let's talk about, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, because I'm trying to decide what's model specific and what's general. Oh, okay, let's talk about wax, all right? So in general, 50s Fender pickups like Strat and Tele bridges are going to use black wax, okay? Why? I don't know. And some of this we've talked about before in all of our rewind time episodes too. You can go back through and kind of look at some of those. We've repaired so many of these pickups. But you can see the string is black, but the wire is also kind of black for a little bit. See, it's yellow here, but it's black up here. Yeah, Fender used black wax up and through 56, 57, 58. I don't know. It's not an exact science. That's another thing. There's no exact year for any of these transitions. It just happened over time, and we'll talk about some more of that later. Yeah, early Fender pickups, unless they're lacquer potted like Telenecks and some other ones, they're gonna have black wax. And then later on, they moved on to the clear wax. Like this string is actually white, but it's dyed black by the string. Okay, other generalities. What can we say here? Oh, we can talk about the flat work a little bit also. Vintage Fender, especially pre-CBS, black flat work, especially, like I said, the early stuff, has kind of a texture to it. And this is getting super nerdy here. It's something you're probably not going to notice unless you've seen a bunch of these. But if you look at it, it's just, I almost want to call it like a tiny checkerboard sort of pattern. It's not necessarily on all of them either, but it's just, you can kind of tell when you've seen a bunch of these if it's old flat work or not. Another thing about the flat work, the hole size for this lead is tiny. You've heard me bitch about this multiple times. Every rewind time on a vintage Fender pickup I complain about how tiny that lead wire hole is. Here's one. Look at that. You gotta fit 2 cloth leads through that. I don't know how Fender did it back in the day. I could just see people in the 50s going, oh, fuck this shit, this is horrible. It's awful. On the modern pickups, and sometimes on rewinds, actually this is a good example of that, that hole is much larger, which makes, let's be honest, a lot more sense. But if you see a really large lead wire hole on one of these, or a Tele or anything like that, it's either been drilled out or it's modern. Let's see. This is actually, by the way, we'll talk about a set here real quick. This is a set of 1960 Fender Strat pickups. And we'll get into kind of more of the detail of these when we get into the Strat stuff. These have been rewound. This one right here, somebody drilled this hole out. And I've got to be honest, I've done it once or twice. Sometimes it's just so small that it's nearly impossible to get the lead through. But this is an example of a big lead wire hole, but the pickup is actually vintage. Okay, I think at this point we're probably coming to the end of the generalities, at least the ones that I can think of currently. Again, there's so much more. There's so much information here. Let's get into model specific, I suppose, at this point. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. If there's something major that I forget, maybe I'll try to cut it in at the end. Okay, let's talk Strat. I'm going to try to get through this as quick as I can while still getting all the information in. Strat pickups start 1954, right? The earliest ones are going to be Alnico 3 magnets. And the way you can kind of tell a 54 or 55 is they have a slightly different pole piece spacing, right? Maybe I'll throw up a picture of that. But one of these magnets, I forget which one it is right offhand, was taller than the other one in 54 and 55 with those Alnico 3s. Pretty shortly after that, they went to this stagger, again, sometime 55, 56, somewhere in there. The magnet diameter was a little different on the early stuff. There's 2 diameters for vintage magnets, right? And it varies a little bit too, just from, having, a little bit of variance. 0.195 and 0.187. And the 195, the bigger magnets are going to be the earlier ones. And the same goes for Tele also. So you're going to see the 0.195 magnets kind of up through early 60s off and on. This 1960 Strat set is cool because this one is around 195. This one is around 195. But this one is a 187. And if you look, the magnets are aged differently also. These are all Alnico 5 though. So you're going to start seeing Alnico 5 in Teles. You start seeing around 55. I assume it was around the same time for Strats, 56, 57, somewhere in there. Again, there's no well, I'm sure there is some information on this stuff, but it was a long time ago. A good reference for Tele pickups specifically is the Nacho Blackguard book. If you can get your hands on one of those, they are very expensive and kind of hard to find, but there's a lot of good information in that. Oh gosh, this is a lot of talking. All right, where were we? So let's talk about magnet polarity. Excuse me. Strats. They started out north, right? Yes, they did. That's what I was trying to tell you. They started out north polarity, as did Teles. They switched to south polarity sometime around 1960. So if you've got a 1950s, Strat pickup that somebody's claiming is a 50s, and you check it and it's south, is it 50s? I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, some of them could have snuck out like that. Again, this 60 Strat set is interesting because we have south, north, and south. Somebody has changed this. The north one, that's not right. As you can tell, these pickups have been rewound. Okay. Oh man, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I know I've said that already. So, flat work on Strats. See this little bevel on the bottom here? And also on the top. They did that on the early Strat pickups, maybe to keep the wire from snagging or something like that. I don't know the exact reason why they did it. But on the bottom flat work, they did that for quite a while, like on up until the gray period. But on the top flat work, they kind of stopped doing it on the top sometime in the early 60s. You can see this one has it, but this one actually doesn't. And this one doesn't either, but it does still have the bevels down here on the bottom. Okay, so once we start getting into the early 60s with Strat, like I said, what these are, your magnet bevels typically will be a little heavier than they were in the 50s also. Again, not always the case, but sometimes that happens. They switch over to the clear wax. All of the early Strats are going to have Formvar wire. So, what's Formvar wire? It's the orange stuff. Now this is interesting because I got these in and I was looking at this wire and it doesn't really show up on camera, but it's not the right color. Like I said, these have been rewound, and I think this is like an orange poly sort of wire, which is actually not correct, and we're probably going to end up redoing these. The proper Formvar wire looks more like this, and I know that looks really similar on camera, but it's a lot darker, and the vintage stuff is even darker than this still. I'll throw up a couple of pictures of some vintage original wind pickups. You can kind of get sort of an idea what that looks like. There is modern stuff that's that dark, and of course you also got to remember there's so much dirt that gets on these pickups over the years, and that makes the wire darker also. So later in, let's jump to 1964, a big thing happens with the Strat pickups. They turn gray, or grayish green, basically black to gray around 64. There are exceptions to that. 67 Strat pickups are typically black. I don't know why, it doesn't make sense. But they also switched to plain enamel coil wire, which is purple-ish. Some of the early stuff, like the 64, 65s, can actually be more of like a maroon sort of color. And then once you get into the 70s, the stuff gets really dark and black, kind of like this. Okay, next big change in Strat. We got to speed this up a little bit or we're going to be here all day. They stopped beveling magnets at a point. You can see here, this is 70s. I think 74 is when they stopped beveling the magnets, around there. And 74, 75 also, they went to kind of the flat pole pieces. Oh gosh. This almost needs to be 2 parts, guys. This is ridiculous. Alright, so what else about vintage Strat pickups can I say? I think I've covered most of it. If the wire is off of these pickups for whatever reason, you can look at the magnets, and a lot of the times the old 50s ones are going to be rough cast. but not always. That's, you know, not always something you can go by. Okay, is that it for Strat? I mean, we should probably just move on for the sake of moving on, and if I forgot something major, I will cut it in later. Let's move on to Tele. All right. So, like I said, flat pole. We start out, was that 1950, maybe 1949 even. Pretty much like a lap steel pickup. And again, on the Tele stuff, you're looking for that flak around the magnets most of the time. The earliest ones, the earliest Tele pickups are going to have a zinc-plated steel base plate on them rather than the copper we see here. That change kind of happened sometime in the early 50s, 51, 52, something like that. The Broadcaster pickup has a pretty unique feature. We've actually had a couple of those. The Broadcaster, right where these coil wires hook up, have two little notches there, kind of cut out of the flatwork where it wraps around. And also the Broadcaster, at least the ones that I've seen, have thin flatwork on the bottom, like the same thickness as that's on the top. You can see this is a little bit thicker. But the earliest Broadcasters are going to have, usually, at least what I've seen, I mean, they're so rare, it's kind of hard to see a bunch of them, the same thickness on the top and bottom. Okay, so flat pole is going to run up through about 1954, maybe early on into 55. In 55, these end magnets stay flush, but the two middle ones get raised up a little bit. They call them a stagger pole pickup. And then later on, it stays like that for a while up through, I think, kind of early to mid-60s, and then they actually bumped up the end magnets a little bit also, and the middle two became taller to kind of help with the, the radius of the strings. Okay, so same thing happened with Tele as Strat in 1964. You're going to go to the gray bottom pickups, and Tele pretty much stayed gray. You don't really see black past 1964, at least that I've seen. We can also talk about dating Fender pickups real quick. Gibson started, the very first time you're going to see like a date on a Fender pickup is around 1964, and it would be on one of these. It'd be a yellow stamp. I've got a picture of this I'll put up now. The yellow stamp pickups were very short-lived. Once they switched to gray, they started writing the date by hand, either with a pencil or a Sharpie or something like that. Same thing with Tele. And then, what was the next one? They started stamping them later, like this. And that started sometime in 1968, 1969. Another thing that changed in Fender pickups towards the late 60s, and this applies to pretty much everything, they changed from cloth leads to PVC leads. That was a pretty big change. I don't like PVC leads. I wish they would have stayed with the cloth. What else do we have here? Okay, so we've got Tele bridges down. Let's talk about Tele necks real quick. Got a couple of those here. This is a vintage one. It's a 1968 Tele. I actually have to rewind this, so I've got the thing off. It was kind of rusty. The earliest the earliest Blackguard Tele neck pickups, the magnets are going to be flush on the bottom. See that? And you're going to see that same kind of flak that you see on the bridge pickups. And after a while, they start protruding out of the bottom like that. And again, look, it's not perfect. This pickup, however, this threw me a little bit. This is not a vintage 50s Tele neck pickup, but it sure looks like one. I mean, they've got the flak around the magnets. It has the correct cover on it, which I'll talk about here. See how that cover goes all the way down to the very bottom? That's what those early covers look like. Later on, they started having a little bit of a cutaway to them. And even the covers were pretty primitive early on, like hand ground on the bottom and stuff. It's lacquer dipped. Now, does it glow? I don't know if I checked that. It does. It glows a little bit. This is not vintage. This is a very, 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 very close replica made by a guy that I can't remember the name of. Over a picture, This might have fooled me. That's why if you're authenticating these, you've got to send them in, because you just have to be able to look at it in person to be able to tell. So how can I tell it's not original? Well, number one, the guy told me. The magnets, I don't think are beveled based on the way that this flak kind of looks. I don't think they're beveled at all, and they should be. That's one thing. It also just looks pretty new. And the flat work, we talked about that earlier. I think it's laser cut. It looks laser cut to me. Yeah, sneaky little pickup. So yeah, the cover changed sometime in, I think, I gotta be honest, I don't know. Sometime in the 60s, the cover changed to this kind of more cutaway. You'll see different color cloth wires. You'll see this one's actually blue. You see that a lot in kind of the mid to late 60s also. Anything else about Tele next? Not that I can think of at the moment. Alright, I think we're getting towards the end of this. There's just so much to talk about. I know I've probably forgotten stuff. And this is really boring. If you're sitting all the way through this and you've made it to this point, thank you. I took part of my day to do this, so I really appreciate that. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Either write down in the comments, send me an email. It's so cool to see all these vintage pickups, guys. I mean, even today, I'll get stuff in that I've never seen before. Like, you know, a spec or something. Like the other day I got in I was in a Gibson T-top, and one of the start wires was like blue. I've never seen that before. That's cool. And then you go and ask somebody like, oh yeah, I've seen that once or twice. Weird tape, just strange things. And it's ever changing. But you can generally tell what's done at the factory and what was done, you know, later on by a repair person or something like that. I'm getting very tired of talking, so I think we're going to go ahead and cut this video short. Hopefully this helped you guys out a little bit. I think I've got most of what I wanted to say in here. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time. Take it easy, guys. Hey guys, there is one thing I forgot to mention I wanted to add in here real quick. I know I didn't talk about every single model of Fender pickup, but most of you guys are probably looking at Strat and Tele, as that's faked the most often. But if you want to know about Jag and Jazzmaster and stuff, we can always do a video on that later too. Or again, if you just have any questions, just send me an email or something, and we could talk about any Fender model. All right. Again, thanks for watching, guys. See you later.